The new year brings new health goals and wealth goals. Protecting your identity is an important step. Your info is in endless places that could expose you to identity theft, leading to lost funds. LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second. If your identity is stolen, our restoration specialists will fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Resolve to make identity health and wealth part of your New Year's goals with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
I had that dream again. My small business needs to hire, but I don't use LinkedIn and I hire wrong. So our orders get all backed up. We're drowning in paperwork, then actually drowning, careless fighting off sharks with a stapler, and pirates are pillaging the office copier, and then I wake up.
Don't let hiring nightmares ruin your dreams. LinkedIn Jobs' new AI assistant goes beyond the resume, using unique insights to deliver a smarter shortlist. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/quality. Start hiring today with LinkedIn.
Good morning, Crust. It's a great day to be a bread brother.
Ugh, mornings are not my jam. Or jelly.
Oh, come on. Stop loafing around.
I just woke up feeling hollow inside.
Psst, just grab one of the new Morning Uncrustables sandwiches, like Bright-Eyed Berry or Up and Apple, filled with 12 grams of protein and tons of deliciousness. Crust, what are you eating?
It's just granola, not even yogurt.
No crust, no fuss. Uncrust your mornings.
Thanks for listening to No Question About That. You can support this show by visiting patreon.com/NQATpod or in your Apple podcast feed. We do a backer show each week going deep dive into a topic related to United. Or if you don't want to part with your cash, an even better way is to leave us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And now on with the show. Welcome to No Question About That. This is United Inc., our finance show with subprime goals, also known as Jamie, or the other way around. Jamie, how's it going?
Yeah, I'm good, Ed. As we know, football never sleeps, and apparently neither does money. So there is plenty of us to be talking about.
That was the name of the reboot of the Wall Street franchise, wasn't it? Money Never Sleeps.
Exactly, yeah.
All right. Very good. We're going to talk about player sales and purchases today in broad sense. We'll talk about why United are briefing that they can afford Sesko without sales, because they are, because some of the favourites were reporting it. What sales look like. So the economics of United freezing out these players. Does it matter? What if one of the famous 5 stays? Some details on Rashford. I thought that was interesting, because Barcelona gave some details about exactly how much they were paying him and the pay cut and all of that. What a deal for Anthony might look like. Betis are playing poor at the moment, I would say, which may or may not be true. But could they construct a deal that might make sense? And then maybe talk a little bit about Chelsea in the context of Garnacho. Chelsea are willing to spend any money on any player except for Alejandro, it seems. And then a little note on Euro 2025, the women's tournament that just ended with an England victory. Packed as always. All right, let's talk about Sesko. Can United afford him?
Can they? Well, I mean, I've been, maybe mischievous is the wrong word, but postulating after I saw the reports about, no player sale being needed. Now, I think, look, we've talked about the value of certain players that we've been buying and how it's potentially like somewhat on the rich end. I think it's probably also, it's worth starting with that same point for Sesko. Like a bit like Højlund, you're still buying a little bit of potential, arguably de-risk because of Christopher Vivell's influence. But how might a deal be funded? Well, Leipzig, it's reported that, they need to sell some players to balance the books. So it's why Sesko and Xavi Simons have been touted as players that could leave. And I think there's kind of probably two ways that a deal could be facilitated without selling a player. I think the first one, which is probably higher up in terms of probability, is trading, in terms of not necessarily much cash being exchanged in the value of a deal, but players being used to exchange. So obviously Højlund is high up on the list at the moment, and that wouldn't completely fill the void. But arguably a question as to would there be other players that could also be included as part of a deal to make up the 70 million euros? I hope it comes down a little bit.
Yeah.
Second one, which is a little bit more theoretical and somewhat related by timing at the moment, is, we've got obviously the new training complex that is opening, I think, in a week or so, once the players return from the US tour. Now, obviously United have lost their training kit sponsors, Tezos, which was worth around about £20 million a year. But they don't have a training ground sponsor.
Used to be Aon.
For those who are old enough.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. For those who are old enough, we used to have Aon as a partner, and I think that was worth around £15 million a year. If you look at other clubs that have had similar deals, there's not been one, I think, for a while, but they've all been around that mark. Is there a world in which United could be selling the training kit and the training ground as a sponsorship deal together?
Hey, Sir Jim.
Could that be a way to kind of raise some funds?
Any thinking on this one? Could Sir Jim come in here? I mean, given that, I know it's cheeky, but given that there are benchmarks here, a related party deal with Ineos, Grenadiers, if you want to, or whatever sub-brand, at 35 million for the two of them would be very easy to justify, of course, because there's already a benchmark, and that's what you need in the Premier League rules, effectively. You may need really detailed benchmarks for complex deals if you're Manchester City, or very simple ones if you've already done the deal. Yeah. It is an interesting world in which we've seen actually several clubs over the last couple of years without front of shirt sponsorships. Chelsea have been bouncing around. They had a very short-term one at the end of last year. Looks like we've got a longer-term one. They had a deal with a company that basically didn't exist in Infinite Athlete. It was very odd, very, very odd. And Nottingham Forest didn't have a shirt sponsor. Some kits look weird without a sponsor. Theirs looked very good. But, United not being without a training kit sponsor is going to be a bit odd. Could they do something there?
Yeah, and it'd be a nice way for Mark Armstrong, who, listeners may recall, joined a few months ago now. It would be potentially a nice deal to kind of get the ball rolling and start to kind of lay his stall out a little bit. I don't, if we're talking about sponsorship deals, I would actually prefer something to not be that long term. Right. But, say you could do a 3-year deal or a 5-year deal, just because I don't think you're selling at, the prime market at the moment.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And that could help actually facilitate a slightly higher fee in the near term. So, they will be entrepreneurial about it, but it's something I'm keeping an eye on. But I do think, coming back to the Sesko point, the players being exchanged may be the most likely, but I think it would be because it would be Højlund plus someone.
And let's talk about how player exchanges work from an accounting point of view, because that's kind of, there's two versions of this. There's kind of a cash point of view and there's an accounting point of view. And the cash version for United would be quite useful, a swap, because we're a bit cash short. And if Højlund, who's been in the RB group previously, of course, with Salzburg, if he was willing to make a move and be a part exchange in that one, that would be useful for United and useful for RB Leipzig, who'd get a good young forward who's their kind of player, honestly, young player. From a cash point of view, that'd be useful from an accounting point of view, sometimes you get these really dodgy ones where they've got a zero book value and go for a massive amount or something like that. And it's very useful from a PSR point of view. United, as we know from March Critchley's reporting, aren't really in a problematic position on PSR. Don't necessarily need to do that. Højlund had quite a high book value. So does this make it useful to do a swap? You'd give him a nominal number, basically. What's his book value at the moment? I guess it's 35 million or something like that.
I think
Maybe
it's
a bit higher.
I think I've got it at just above 40.
Just
Yeah,
above 40. All right, that makes sense. Yeah. So nominal value of just above 40 to make sure you break even on the book value, and then Sesko would be 60 million euros or whatever. So a little bit of cash would go along with it.
Yeah, and I think that's also, bringing back, I think, what we've talked about in prior episodes with Villa and Chelsea. UEFA, in their regulations, they pay very close attention to these swaps, as they call it, the player exchanges and the value. So what tends to happen is if they, smell a rat, so to speak, or something smells fishy, they will peg everything to the book value of a transfer plus any cash that is exchanged.
Yeah.
And then there's maybe we can go into this in another time, but, there's a complex series of calculations that are done to work out the amortization rate.
Yeah.
For each player, for each club.
Yeah.
Involved in the transfer.
Yeah. And we should note that Juve are still in trouble with the Italian tax authority over the Arthur Melo deal from a few years ago, which looked really dodgy at the time because everyone was like, that player's never worth 80 million euros or whatever it went to. And they said, we don't like the look of this. It's been different in the Premier League, of course, who basically take no view on the nominal values, but Nottingham Forest reserve goalkeeper went to Newcastle for, I think it was £32 million or some crazy number in that whole series of weird PSR deals a year or so back. And he's played like one game. So I'd be looking at that. Follow the money to, which part of Marianaki's and Saudi accounts this money really, fell into, and go, don't like this.
But look, the fact that Højlund has a sizable book value, I think, kind of helps United. And I think actually from if we're thinking about broader picture, financial structure, wage architecture that United have got, this wouldn't really change much.
No.
You've just arguably got a player that's unencumbered by, I wouldn't say bad few years, but, a tough few years that can come in afresh, and financially it's kind of, one for another.
Now, if the deal was pure cash, United have spent heavily, obviously, on Mbeumo and Cunha. I don't know if we know the exact breakdown of the Mbeumo deal. They said 4 installments. I don't think it's been reported about exactly the weighting. Cunha is obviously in 3 installments over the next 2 years, so it's quite a heavy amount of cash. But he had a release clause. So what are you going to do? Basically, United had 90 million in cash on hand at the last accounts, and this Bank of America credit line tot them all up with some beer maths, and any Sesko deal would not be 60 million, 70 million euros up front. Basically, it couldn't be done. Structure of the deal would really matter if it was in cash.
Totally, because I think, doing the back of the envelope, Cunha this season would be 45 when you take into account all the fees that come along. 45 in cash outlay. Mbeumo would probably be another just under 20. So you're looking at basically the cash gone, and then you're into overdraft.
Yeah. And no more cash coming in from Sir Jim. I mean, he could float United alone at market rates. That would actually be perfectly fine under PSR. It'd have to be a market rate interest rate, as we found out with Manchester City's sort of partial victory over the Premier League a while back. They made a massive fuss about it, and it was just about loans. Arsenal got hit quite hard, but yeah. So he could do that. There's certainly routes to United having more money. It's actually not even that difficult to borrow more money. I'm sure Bank of America would increase the credit line if we really needed it. So I don't see that as being a problem, but they have said that they're going to work within their means. So that would be the problem, wouldn't it? Like borrowing money to buy players. Unless they're very confident on exits, of course.
Exactly. And I mean, to be honest, if you're very confident on exits, there are other funding mechanisms that can be used. Like you could effectively do factoring for that. Yep. So for those not aware, you could effectively just kind of get an advance on those fees at a discount, which is effectively, what the lending party where they make their money. Something that's actually used pretty frequently in football. And it's how a lot of clubs get around this kind of transfer installment payment terms. They may want all of the fees up front, and so they'll basically kind of, take a slight haircut on that by lending against the whole of the transfer fee at the point of the transaction's done.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you're going very nerdy and talk about the future value of money, and so it actually makes a lot of sense to do that as well. All right. There's some interesting mechanics on exits as well. And so one of the sort of tropes we see online a lot from United fans is, stick them in the under-21s, freeze them out. And that'll teach them a lesson. And United have sort of done that, of course, because the 5 players who were left out of the squad room, and Amarina said is not going to play them. They're not part of it. And I think that's been a popular move amongst United fans. There's a cost to that. One, in that you're signalling to the market that this asset has no value. And I think in any kind of negotiations, that's never really a good position to be in. Whatever kind of asset. Did that factor into Rashford's eventual fee and loan to Barcelona? I don't know. Everyone's known we're desperate to get rid for a long time. The one interesting thing on Rashford, I don't know if you saw, is that Barcelona basically published the wages he was getting. He took a 15% discount on his United wages. And then if you add that all up, he would have been earning about £260,000 a week. That's counting the 25% discount or non-bonus from not being in the Champions League. So it gave you kind of benchmark. So I think some of the numbers that had been floating around from some of the papers that he earns 400 grand a week or whatever have proven to not be correct. He's still on a massive wage, which will tell us how much United's saving on that massive wage.
New Year, same extra value meals at McDonald's. So now get 2 snack wraps, plus fries, and a medium soft drink for just $8.
For limited time only. Prices and participation may vary. Prices may be higher in Hawaii, Alaska, and California, and for delivery.
Yeah, and we talked about it a few episodes ago. Like, you saw it in the third quarter results, right? There was about, I think, a 6-7 million saving in one quarter alone from Rashford's wages. And I do think, I think there's a strategic point, which I think you've touched upon, which is, putting the onus on players to move on. And I think kind of regaining, some poise in how United operate and not necessarily succumbing to player power, which, I think is important, and making decisions for the long term. I think on the negotiating point, like I hear everything that people say in terms of it does put us in a weaker position. It makes it harder to sell and generate significant fees. I also think there's a pragmatism to it, which is, look, the reality is, no matter which way this would have been done, I think it would have been hard to fetch a big fee for any of the players. Probably the peak time to sell Rashford, if you were going to, was a couple of years ago. Well, I think we're so far beyond that point. They're probably just being pragmatic about it. And, if you put some of these players in the context of the broader football market, there are other players that are out there that probably need to be moved on from big clubs that are on big wages. You know, Jack Grealish is a prime example.
Mm-hmm.
You know, City paid £100 million for him, put him on a big contract, I think around about £300,000 a week. You know, he's going to be costing them probably 45 million a year, split evenly between amortization and wages. You know, I think there's reports that he's on the market for £40 million. In that context, you know, put a Rashford up versus Grealish, yeah, everyone will have their views about the players, but if I'm a buying club, well, okay, neither player are at their peak. Rashford has probably shown to have higher potential or higher potential peaks than
certainly
someone
higher
like
output.
Grealish.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I think it's a pretty sensible position that United have kind of put Rashford in the market at. Like, yes, we know that the club probably could, and argument whether they should be better sellers. But I think the reality is sorting out the wage structure, getting, you know, the makeup of the team, how they want it, probably a higher priority at the moment.
Yeah. No, I do agree with that. I mean, I don't think it's a great position, really. I mean, I've been in a position where, well, organisation I worked for, I structured a purchase of a bunch of toxic assets. That was not awesome. Well, for anyone on that side of the deal. So it's not really a great position to be desperate sellers, for sure. And I think we'll see with Garnacho that Chelsea are playing hardball, and this may go right up to the end of the window. We'll see on that one, right? If they really are the most serious purchasers here. On Rashford, I think everyone knew it was time. Whether you like the player or hate the player, my mentions on any platform, Spotify, YouTube, would tell me that a very large percentage of people hate the player. It's a different story. I did a whole pod about Rashford, and my long read a couple of weeks ago was about him. So if you want my view, you can go there. It's complex. But on the financial thing, yes, just moving him on and sorting the top end of the wage structure out will help balance things out financially, whatever. Like, we'd have loved £100 million fee, big wages, very limited market, makes it more difficult. We'll see how he does at Barcelona. He looks good right now. Yeah, he's looked very trim and fit over the summer break. He performed very well the other day. We'll see over the course of the season whether that encourages Barcelona to take up that option. Whether they can afford it is probably the more serious point. I think, yeah, Garnacho is the one that's kind of interesting, really, because the benchmark is Noni Madueke, Anthony Elanga, Jamie Gittins, all these wide players that are going for the £50 million region-ish. Garnacho's numbers are quite a lot better than Gittins, I'd say. Worse than Elanga's last season, but not if you take a 3-year view on it. And I think everyone, even those people who don't like Garnacho's attitude, whatever that is, would say he's got a higher potential than Elanga. So that should be the ballpark, shouldn't it, really?
Oh, totally. And look, he also has more experience than a lot of those players. He's been in environments, he's been in a pressure situation. You know, yes, you can take the view about his mentality, attitude, etc. But the reality is, you know, versus those players that you mentioned, he has been around the block a little bit more, and so is a bit more streetwise, or you would hope. And look, I think, you know, why are Chelsea playing hardball? Well, yeah, I did a piece on them and their finances post the UEFA fines, which were, you know, some of the biggest that UEFA have ever done.
Yeah.
The you know, the brief TLDR is, you know, in 2 years' time, Chelsea need to be in a position where their losses are only €5 million. I think they've got a lot of headroom for that. The big thing for them, though, is there's something called a List A, which is what, you know, it's a list of players that you submit to UEFA, which are kind of like, here are the players that we want to put into the Champions League. Chelsea are restricted in terms of registering players on that list. They have to, in order to register new players, they have to get rid of cost. So I think it might have been one of the reasons why they sold Noni Madueke.
Yeah.
There's a couple of other players like Christopher Nkunku who are quite a big portion of that cost. that they also probably want to move on. And don't forget, they've still been buying players, and they've still had players from prior seasons that they bought that are now arriving that probably want to be registered on that list. So they really need to be making, I think, somewhere between 50 and 70 million of savings. Nicholas Jackson will be one of those players. And obviously they want to then minimize the cost of players that they are now buying. And they're probably trying to play hardball with us, knowing the position that we're in.
Yeah, it does make it really interesting. They're keen sellers for Nicholas Jackson, despite the repeated briefings that they value him at 80, 100, the cost of a GDP of a small country, whatever it is. A striker who can't strike the ball, no thank you. But that's a football point, not a finance point. He will go for much, much less than that, unless he goes to Saudi, of course, because Chelsea are both keen and very effective sellers to Saudi. Conspiracy theorists, pick your conspiracy theory on that one.
I was going to say,
Anthony,
do you know why, Ed?
I do know why. I do know why. It's funny. I mentioned this on the last pod because, I don't really get into finances on that one too much. But, Clear Lake do have a sizable LP relationship with the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia. Normally, there are very strict firewalls around this thing and tight LP contract. I could probably publish an old one for listeners to look at what they look like and all of that. But there were also question marks depending on the fund about how exactly you structure those firewalls, because there's both ethical and financial and legal and contractual questions that you normally look into place. But I know why there are conspiracy theories. Also, there's just relationships, right? They have a very strong relationship with people in Saudi Arabia because they built that up through the financial position. So you can take a non-conspiracy theory view of it. They just have a strong relationship with these people. And then Saudi Arabia decide that João Felix is worth £50 million. So amazing.
It's amazing how many people value João Felix so highly.
He's had one good season his entire career.
He's got a great agent.
Yeah, mega. He's just amazing. Yeah. Anthony, there's interesting issue here, isn't there, in that United's book value is £32.5 million, I think, right? So we'd really like to not sell below that. Betis seem reluctant to pay that amount or can't afford it, even though they have sold a couple of players this summer. That would be their record transfer. And so they've floated this idea of a partial economic rights sale. I think in reality, I think this is weird reporting. And in reality, this would be a low fee with a massive sell-on is what they're looking at. Something like half of the 32 million plus a huge sell-on clause, maybe even something like the Mason Greenwood sell-on clause, which is 50% of future sales. Would that work for United to take a hit on the PSR now and make it back later?
If I was the person in charge of the purse strings, no. I think he is one of the few players that, has gone on loan, done very, very well, and has actually garnered interest.
Yeah.
And I actually think, with the change that the club is trying to portray, I think, within the transfer market, whilst I said earlier, there's a reason to be pragmatic, I think actually also where you can, you should be really pushing the envelope. And, could a deal or could a market be created for Anthony? I think so. And the reality is Betis have made a surplus on transfer fees of around 30 million euros this year. And so I think there is also an argument to say, well, okay, if you do really want him and you're making all of these positive noises, you should actually back that up a little bit.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think, Anthony has also indicated, I believe, that he is willing to, make some adjustments or amendments to how he is compensated in order to kind of get the deal through. So I don't think United will be countenancing an offer like that, or at least not at this stage. Maybe as we go through the transfer window, things may evolve and, needs must. But I think right now the right decision would be to hold out.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I mean, even a loan is kind of problematic. I mean, you can make the wages back. Maybe there's a small fee. United would be outlaying a significant amount on amortization of his deal from Ajax. Anyway, it was sort of pragmatic last season to do that for half a season. For a full season this season, there's some pain, financial pain that comes with that. Same with any kind of structure where you take a low fee up front and a high sell on. So, yeah, see where the market takes you. There's probably interest, £30 million around about for a player who did well in La Liga last season. It doesn't seem outrageous. We might have been having a different view at the beginning of last season, 6 months in when he was not playing. It was terrible and there was no output and he had this massive fee. But with his book value where it is and his performance in La Liga, it doesn't seem outrageous as a number to try and hit, especially compared to some of the other wingers, right, who have gone for the fees we've just mentioned, that are well into the 50s.
Totally. And I think, when you look at United's books, out of the famous five, which I might use again, actually, out of the famous five, he's probably costing United the second most after Sancho. And so if you want to, restructure things, get your finances looking like they're in the right shape, which will be important for future conversations, he is definitely one where I don't think you really want to take the hit.
I'm hopeful that we won't have any of these players left on our books at the end of the window. I mean, Garnacho and Antony, there's certainly a market there for them. Tyrell Malacia, who knows, but the cost to United annually is tiny. Basically, he's on small wages and he came on a small fee. Someone will take him, probably a loan, I imagine, to prove out his fitness. And then the last one is Sancho, and this is taking a while because Chelsea didn't take up the option, or Sancho asked for too big a wages. Who knows? His wages would be very difficult for anyone in Spain and Italy to afford, bar Barcelona and Real Madrid. Atletico could probably afford it too. Anyone else? There was a lot of talk about Juve. They would not pay the kind of wages he's earning, I would say. Is there a market for him? And is he willing to take a discount on his future wages? United will end up subsidising for his final year of his contract, I imagine. 5 million or so, something like that would cover half of it. That seemed fair, but it's the 4 years after that that's the problem for Sancho, it would appear.
Yeah, and, I think United will, as you say, will probably put some level of contribution towards it. Not too big, but some level. But without wanting to get kind of all pious, like he probably does need to take a look at where he is and where he wants to go. There's been talk about a move to Turkey, which we've discussed in the past, which I think is effectively to preserve his wages. But, the advice he's getting is important right now. There is a school of thought where if you take a wage cut and you can guarantee that for 4 years, there's a world in which that's better than, one more year of a very big contract, because the reality is wherever he goes, it's going to be pretty hard for him to get anywhere close to what he's on at the moment.
Absolutely.
And so he's at that part of the journey. Does he go back to somewhere that, he knows, like a Dortmund? Again, they won't pay him the same wages. A 15 million break-even fee is probably doable for them, particularly post Jamie Gittins. But I think, I think he needs to be one to make the call.
Yeah, and he probably needs to be real about where his career is going. As you say, he could go to Turkey, and it's obviously there's a lot of stars there at the moment, and it's not a particularly weak league, but he's never going to win the Champions League with a Turkish club. What does he want for his future career? Also, is he interested in playing for England again? The FA may have a different view on whether should be part of anything, but he's got to revive his career as much as I imagine he feels angry about what's happened in his 4 years at United. He's got to have some level of self-reflection too about where he's at right now after that period of lack of success. While we're on Turkey, Victor Osimhen, that has been done. I know we've talked about him before, but I think Fabrizio Romano tweeted out the numbers, or was it Ben Jacobs, right? So 21 million netto, or the breakdown is 15 million net annual wages, 5 million on image rights, and 1 million bonus for each year. He's loyalty bonus. The image rights wasn't clear that it was annual, but I think it is. It's normally annualized. That might go into a company, but Turkey has this weird flat rate tax structure, which is 20%, but you also get a rebate, so it can make it effectively 15% flat rate tax. I tweeted this out without giving any context. It confused people quite a lot. If you translate that to the UK, now the higher rate tax rate is 45% in the UK, but then it's obviously tiered depending on where you are. There's also national insurance contributions. I made an assumption that there was a marginal tax rate of like 47%. It's really beer maths. I did it in my head. I was like, yeah, it feels about right to me. If it is, move it up or down depending on like what you believe. The gross amount, annual amount to a Premier League club for him would be 33.7 million or £647,000 a week, right? That may be a few thousand out here or there, right? But just gives you a kind of benchmark of how difficult it would have been for a Premier League club to match that kind of level of wages because of the tax structure.
I think we talked about it as well in the context of Sancho. It makes it basically impossible.
Yeah.
And it is a reason why players move to Turkey. Leroy Sané is another one that's moved this summer, and it's been happening for a number of years. It was actually a mechanism in terms of how Italy used to attract some players kind of post their demise in the 2010s, yes. I think. They had a similar tax break system that ended, I think, in 2023. And it's why players continue to go to Turkey. It is an advantageous system for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the level of the league overall may not be as strong, but yeah, top players will be attracted by top salaries, of course. And it's a stronger league than Saudi. And now you can decide whether that's good for Osimhen. He's a great player. Would have loved to have seen him in the Premier League, especially at United. If you could construct, we could have afforded it if it wasn't like this. If you could construct the perfect number 9 for United, he would be it. IMO and all of that, just not on those numbers. All right.
Yeah.
I think that's true with the transfers. Euro 2025. Congratulations once again to England women. I like saying that because it really triggers people. I just don't. Why successful women? Why would that trigger you unless you have a tiny, tiny cock? I just don't understand it. But it's fantastic women's side. Thomas Tuchel will be looking at that, and can he match what Serena Wiegmann has achieved? Which again, you'd have to say she's one of the greatest coaches of all time. 5 national team finals in a row. But let's look at the revenues and the money. Just under 130 million was generated. This is thanks to Swiss Ramble, who did the breakdown. So that's the top line revenues. That has grown, for comparison, since Euro 2017, where the revenues were just over 10 million. A massive growth in the game. You can also look at the WSL and massive growth in revenues, both in ticketing, with some really big attendances at some grounds, and the TV contract. So huge growth in this market, but also some losses to go with that at Euro 2025 associated with prize money, like training fees and stuff like that as well, to put this tournament on in Switzerland.
First on the football, as you say, it's an incredible achievement. And I don't know, maybe Thomas should be speaking to Serena for any tips on how to, create a great team culture, team environment, because I think definitely in international football, that's one of the things that really does move the needle more than, anything else. Obviously, you need great players. But I think the finances are incredibly interesting. And for anyone that hasn't read the Swiss Rambles breakdown, I think it's very much worth doing. It's been kindly enough to not be under a paywall, this one. But it looks like the hallmarks of obviously great revenue growth, but also investments going on at the same time to continue to drive the growth, which I do think it's exactly the right thing. Yeah. It's exactly the right thing to do.
Yeah, they're not trying to squeeze it too hard yet. I mean, I'm sure at some point, because UEFA and FIFA just can't help themselves, they'll, as this market grows, they'll try and squeeze more revenue out of this. But yeah, they invested in, as I said, the training facilities, greater workforce, security costs, Swiss Ramble notes, and TV coverage of the quality of the TV coverage has gone up. So rather than have a single fixed camera, in fact, these days you can get pretty good TV coverage with an AI-driven single fixed camera. You don't need a camera person who tracks the ball. And so they haven't done any of that. They went to premium stuff, so multiple cameras, full production values. You noticed as well, I think, some really good coverage on BBC and ITV of this tournament. And so, yeah, overall the tournament made a loss, but you can see in the top line revenues what massive growth in the market there is. Note to Sir Jim for Manchester United women, who did buy a player yesterday, one of the Swedish national team midfielders. But there is opportunity in this market if you want to look at it in pure financial terms. There is demand there as well. I think WSL average crowds they've gone up really steeply over the years, and a lot is driven by Arsenal and partly Chelsea using the main stadium as well. It does attract people to come. We've done that at Old Trafford a couple of times. Hasn't really driven massive crowds yet. I'd suggest putting a bit of effort into the marketing to really drive people to be there. 3 United women in that Lionesses squad. There's reason to be hopeful in the finances of that team.
No, totally. And I think also, when you look along the spectrum of what's been happening at other Premier League clubs selling their women's team, I don't know why it was ever mooted that United would kind of countenance such a thing. This is, I think, more reason than ever to not do that. Mm-hmm. If you think about the culture of the club, what the club stands for, the heritage, actually having full ownership of that and being able to drive that in the way that you want, I think is a really meaningful and important factor. There will be some clubs that do need some outside influence and help to drive things. The reality is, in my eyes, there is a pool of Manchester United where they will always be at the table or around the table. So it will be interesting to see, I think. And I think actually some of this is dependent on the performance of the men's team over the next couple of years, right? Like if we can get to a position where the men's first team is back in the Champions League consistently, back to generating a profit, can the team be used to subsidise the women's and actually be a driving force within that investment in the game?
Yeah.
Then I think we're in a good position.
And the subsidy is to improve and I think this is an important point actually, right? It's both an ethical point, but also a financial point. It's to improve the quality of the facilities, the quality of the team, the amount of coaches you get, because there's a real growth opportunity, not just because we want to subsidize it, right? So I got into a back and forth with a Manchester City fan who's like, I'd rather have cheaper ticket prices to go and see the men and subsidize this women's team. Manchester City women, if you look at their accounts, is subsidized to about the tune of 1.2 million a year. Now, you could construct a world in which it's more because they built a new stadium and there's some portion of sponsorship that is allocated, and you can argue whether that's the right portion that is allocated, and so on and so on and so on. But it's about 1.2 million a season. That equates to a subsidy per ticket of about £1.45. So to that Manchester City fan, I told him at the time, I will pay that for him if he stops being a twat on the internet. But like, just, yeah, beyond that stupid glib point, it's not massive amounts of subsidies yet, right? So, and maybe never will do if we're talking about growth of this as a market for both fans going and TV broadcast contracts, which have gone up pretty sharply. And I suspect interest after another England win will increase once again.
Yeah, and if you just think about big picture, what's the plan at United? There's a lot of infrastructure that is either being built or is going to be built. And if you can, for a time being, subsidize a team such that it generates an interest where you can have a stadium that is full, 100,000 people for both men's and women's.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That is an investment that is worthwhile. And it is like, it's something I don't think people picked up on it at the time, but slowly people are getting there. You know, like Omar Barada talks about how the women's team might play there.
He did.
We've now also heard that, you know, it's potentially a venue for a bid for, I think it's the Euros, if not the World Cup, the Women's World Cup, which, you know, may also have funding implications as well. But, you know, if United can have 100,000 seat stadium, the only one that's full 100% capacity for men and women's, I think that's a pretty good place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And perfectly possible, right? Arsenal regularly fill their stadium. Barcelona women, Barcelona feminine fill the Nou Camp as well. So there is demand there, and take it seriously, Sir Jim, and you've got a really huge asset on your hands. Very good. I think we might have gone through our agenda, Jamie.
Is that the first time ever? Sticking to plan.
Sticking to plan. Yeah, sort of. So I'm very bad at that. I to peek behind the curtain, I paid some guy to help me build my strategy on YouTube because I was like, it's good content. Why is this not doing better? Like, will this ever find a market? And he was like, yeah, you're doing this long form stuff, and YouTube are taking long form content more seriously now, especially live. We could do this live one day, Jamie. That'd be interesting with live questions. And
I'd love
shorts.
That'd be great.
That'd be great. Why not? Let's do it. But what's in the middle? He was like, break your content up into sections. I was like, well, it's all a bit free form, isn't it? The conversation was like, have you heard of an agenda? So here we go. We had an agenda and we stuck to it. If I find time, I may break this up into sections. Thank you very much.
Nice one. Thanks a lot, Ed, and looking forward to the next one.
All right. Bye now.
We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Styles McKenzie helping you make those rooms sing. Today's style tip. When it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild, like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Arr, fierce. This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.